Welcome to my review of the first season of Apple TV and Legendary's Monarch: Legacy of Monsters. This series snuck up and completely hit me out of nowhere. It's completely beyond me that we can have a weekly Godzilla show, but that's where we're at. If you're expecting a deeply critical review, you may want to look elsewhere, as I have almost nothing but good things to say about it. So why don't we pack up, lock in, and get ready for my review of Monarch: Legacy of Monsters. I'm going to start this review with everything in the older time period and then move on to present day instead of jumping back and forth. While it may not have been the very first thing we see, we do get a brief appearance by John Goodman as Bill Randa. It seems to be taken from the Skull Island expedition, but features a very different death for him. It was the first, and what seemed like it would be the only cameo of an important Titan besides Godzilla. We got to see the giant spider from Kong and King of Monsters fighting a new crab Titan. The scene ends with Bill Randa seemingly dying and his Monarch bag floating out to places unknown. More on that later.
We then get to see what turns out to be the end of the original Monarch team's time together. This scene was heartbreaking enough, but would have been more so later on in the season. But as someone who always reads the last page of a book first, it was nice to see the ending before things got started. After that, we get to see how the Monarch team got together, as Lee Shaw is taken out of a bar brawl to escort a Japanese scientist on an important expedition. Of course, he doesn't expect it will be a woman, and things don't start great between the two. You could tell that there were going to be romantic sparks between the characters from the start, and I thought they were both written and portrayed very well. That's not even taking into account a younger Bill Randa, who they find coming out of the forest on their trip to the study site. The group would then find the Lawton ship that Bill Randa grew up on, with what we would later learn is called a flame dragon, stalking the halls. This would be one of the few sequences in the flashbacks that featured Titans, as bureaucracy and romance would become the main focus, aside from brief appearances by Godzilla. I did appreciate that they had him show up to the Bikini Atoll Castle Bravo test in 1954. This was in fact a real-life test of thermonuclear weapons by the US government. That did happen. In the show, they lured Godzilla to the bomb with the help of a gamma-ray device created by the neurotic and fun-to-watch Dr. Suzuki character. I thought the progression of these earlier years of the show was handled very well. The way the Monarch division constantly started and stopped was certainly interesting to watch. It was also probably one of Christopher Heyerdahl's better roles, this time as friendly but pragmatic General Puckett. I also thought that having Keiko and Bill Randa ending up as a couple made more sense than her and Lee. Keiko and Bill had the love of science and caring about her son, Hiroshi, in common. This would lead to big heartbreak down the line, but was great for character building on the series. Of course, we know that Keiko would disappear and Randa would die, but Major Lee Shaw would suffer his own disaster on the show. In one of the stronger visual moments for the series, he would disappear during a test voyage to the space between the hollow Earth and the surface world. Initially, I thought they had just gone to the hollow Earth and it looked different because of budget restrictions. But it actually turned out that they only made it to something like a subway station between the two. We would later find Lee Shaw had made it back to the surface world and was in a Monarch hospital. He would become unhinged, taking a hostage and demanding to see Bill Randa before finding an adult Hiroshi to greet him with sad news. It was now 1982. Bill Randa was dead and the world had moved on. This would serve as the big break between the characters. It is also where Hiroshi would meet his second wife, when he later returned with flowers to apologize to the nurse Lee took hostage. It was during this trip that Hiroshi would meet and fall in love with the nurse taking care of his uncle. I liked this for bridging the gap between the timelines. It felt much more natural than Bill Randa's bag being picked up by a fishing boat. The now Colonel Shaw would be confined to a Monarch facility for the rest of his days. That is, until Godzilla shows up again in 2014 in a news broadcast seen by Lee at the retirement facility.
When the show gets to the present day stuff, that's when it really starts to get interesting. They constantly reference the events of the 2014 film as G-Day, The modern scenes take place in 2015 and feature Keiko's grandchildren, a computer hacker, and a returning Leland Lafayette, Shaw III. This is where the true heart of the story takes place as Kate, Kentaro, and May slowly learn about the Monarch files held by Hiroshi Randa.
The G-Day event is shown to have a massive effect on the show. The military has closed off areas of San Francisco, and only small groups of item reclamation teams were let through. I thought it was cool, but kind of an obvious way for Kate and her friends to get into her dad's office. The kids obviously don't have any idea what they are getting into, and I love all of the personal revelations along the way. The fact that Hiroshi Randa had two families was surprising, but served the story rather well. It was pretty great seeing this brother and sister team getting used to working with each other as they chased their father and Titans around the world. The only part I didn't like was that Kate's mom skipped over getting to know Kentaro, and the same could be said of his mom. If I suddenly found out I had a half-child, I would certainly make an effort to get to know them. The new team would of course have to have opposition as well. This was excellently played initially by analyst Tim, security chief Michelle, and assistant director Verdugo of the modern-day Monarch. Obviously, Dr. Serizawa and his assistant were too busy to appear, even in voice form. This was kind of a letdown, in my opinion, because they were the ones being so outspoken and vocal during the 2014 film. Tim definitely was the standout character of these scenes. In my opinion, as Monarch tried to reclaim Hiroshi's files and track his children around the world, Tim and Monarch would eventually catch up to Lee and the others in an Algerian desert. That's where they would all discover Hiroshi as well. It initially seemed like it was going to be a nice family reunion moment before Hiroshi signaled for everyone to move away. Godzilla was back, and this was the first time that we would really get a good look at him up close. Even with all the dirt on him, it would seem his model was used from the most recent Legendary release. He looked great, and the CGI quality was amazing for a television series. It did seem kind of strange that he would just be sleeping in the middle of nowhere, and no one would notice, especially considering there didn't seem to be any hollow earth holes nearby. After that event, Tim would seriously question his role at Monarch. Katie, Kentaro, and May would start to have second thoughts as well. This would be where Lee would join a splinter faction from Monarch, who were trying to close all the emergence holes and keep the Titans from returning to the surface. Tim would eventually take over Lee's place in the group, and they would use Monarch's resources to track him to Kazakhstan. It was at this point that an explosion at the Monarch facility there would go very wrong. It would cause Kate, May, and Lee to get sucked back down to that midway point under the Earth. This series of events would lead to Kentaro ending up in a hospital and eventually being told by director Verdugo to live. Hiroshi would then show up in Japan, not to check in on his son, but look at his files. In what I consider one of the stronger sequences of the show, Emiko would stand up to Hiroshi and tell him he needs to have a relationship with his son before returning her wedding ring. Kentaro would stay mad for a little while, but would team up with Tim and Hiroshi to track the gamma pulse coming from underground. We then cut back to Lee Shaw, who has landed at this underground substation. Before too long, he catches up with May before the two go off to search for Kate. It's at this point that we learn that Keiko has been alive this whole time and hasn't aged, just like what happened to Lee because of gravity moving different or something. The group finally gets back together, and Keiko breaks after learning it's 2015, and not only is Lee an old man, but her husband is dead and son is grown up. Keiko hasn't shown any strong connection emotions to either Kate or Kentaro this season. Honestly, I don't really expect her to have much more than a cameo if the show does get picked up for another one.
In what's clearly the standout visual point of the series, Godzilla shows up to save the group from a flame dragon as they tried to return to the surface. This battle showcased Godzilla's full abilities, including tail slap and atomic breath. As the return pod begins to be sucked up, Lee bravely lets go to let Keiko return and finally have a life. I wasn't too sad about it. The writing kind of seemed on the wall the whole first season that Kurt Russell was going to be one and done. I think they chose the best possible way for him to exit, and I hope they don't spend the second season trying to rescue him. The group finally returns, and Hiroshi and Kate greet their missing family and friends. Both Hiroshi and Kentaro are obviously in shock at Keiko not only being alive, but so young. May is upset to find that her former employer, Apex Cybernetics, funded the whole thing, and Tim, Kentaro, and Hiroshi are now working with them. It is then revealed that 2 years have passed and a lot has happened. They are no longer in the same place. They are now on Skull Island. Everyone is quickly shuttled underground as a Titan approaches. That appears, and in the best cameo of the series so far, it's King Kong.
Overall, I thought it was the best first season of a series I have seen in a long time. I'll admit that I'm a little biased towards Godzilla personally, but that doesn't take away how well it was written, acted, and displayed visually. There wasn't much I could complain about. I thought that the brewing romantic feelings Kate obviously has for May are going to make things strange after her history and not really a breakup with Kentaro. I also kind of wished we could have seen more built around the original major Titans like Ghidorah, Rodan, Mothra, and Behemoth. I understand why they needed to focus on Godzilla for the first season. But hopefully, if this show goes for multiple years, it can explain how Monarch built outposts around those Titans. I did, however, like the new Titans created for the show so far, with the Ice Beast in Alaska probably being the visual standout. I also hope we finally get to see older versions of Tom Hiddleston and Brie Larson's characters in Season 2 flashbacks. It would be kind of strange to not show them if they are going to focus on Skull Island. Even if it's just one episode, I would be happy with that. Overall, I think this series is definitely worthy of anyone investing their time in either on Apple Plus or the inevitable Blu-ray and 4K releases.
I want to extend my gratitude to all of you who watched and enjoyed this video. It was certainly a labor of love for me. With that said, please leave a like and subscribe if you did enjoy the video. Please also consider supporting the channel at patreon.com/macesunbox. Thank you again, and I will see you all in my next video.